German engineers made a fatal mistake. They designed weapons for the soldier, not for the war. While Berlin chased precision and build quality, the USSR was the first to realize that in a total slaughter, professionals die just as quickly as rookies, which meant weapons had to be cheap, mass-produced, and disposable. World War II finally turned human life into dry statistics. While the German school demanded complexity and jewel-like fitting, creating mechanisms built to last for ages, Soviet designers bet on industrial cynicism. They stripped away everything: ergonomics, part longevity, and finishing standards. A weapon no longer needed to serve for decades. It only needed to work exactly 5 minutes longer than its owner lived in battle. It was a triumph of mathematics over aesthetics. The 5 steel tools we will examine proved that in a meat grinder, it is not the most technically advanced who survives, but the one who could nullify the enemy's skill with an endless stream of cheap stamped iron. We begin with the Drum of Rage, a machine that devalued the very concept of aimed fire, replacing it with a solid wall of lead that was impossible to evade. Why spend years training a sniper if you can give a former factory worker a tool that simply erases life across an entire sector of fire? The PPSH wasn't built for duels. It was a mechanical way to reset the enemy's training to zero. The Spargin submachine gun was the most straightforward answer to the question of how to flood the front with automatic fire for pennies. A frantic rate of 1,000 rounds per minute turned close-quarters combat into a zone where an opponent with a slower weapon didn't even have time to pull the trigger. The design was utterly cynical. Almost the entire submachine gun was assembled using cold stamping, allowing it to be produced by the millions in ordinary furniture factories by yesterday's teenagers. Soldiers put up with the 11-pound weight and fickle drum magazines because in urban ruins, this machine worked like an industrial mower. By 1945, the fire density of Soviet infantry became so high that any tactical superiority the enemy possessed simply drowned in a torrent of lead. But while this steel heavyweight took all the official glory, in a besieged city, a design was forged from scraps of sheet metal that proved to be far more practical and effective than Spargin's legend. While Leningrad was surviving on glue and leather belts, the engineer Sudayev created a submachine gun that Western experts would later call the best of the entire Second World War. Without a single gram of excess metal, pure distilled death, the Sudayev submachine gun, PPS, was the final evolution of industrial cynicism. While the PPSH still required complex woodworking, the PPS consisted almost entirely of stamped sheet metal and rivets. Producing it took 3 times less time and half as much steel. Sudayev cut everything. There is no wooden stock, only a folding iron frame, no complex safety, and no heavy drum. A simple box magazine worked where any other mechanism would fail. It was the ideal weapon for those who had to survive in the cramped confines of tanks or on reconnaissance raids. The PPS proved that when resources hit zero, engineering genius can create a masterpiece from scraps that humiliates the polished blueprints of peacetime in every category. But no matter how mass-produced the submachine guns were, the trenches were still ruled by an old bony friend, a rifle that should have gone to the scrap heap of history in the previous century, but ended up deciding the fate of all Europe. This rifle should have been decommissioned before the war even started, but instead it became the primary tool of mass clearance. While the Germans fussed over optics and precision bolts, the three-liner simply and steadily turned enemies into statistics, regardless of mud or lack of maintenance. The Mosin Nagant is a monument to technical stubbornness. By 1941, it was hopelessly obsolete, long, clunky, and featuring a bolt that required brute physical force. Yet these very flaws became its trump cards. While German carbines demanded attention and cleanliness, the Mosin operated on the principle of hit it, and it fires. It was so primitive that it was impossible to break, and so powerful that its bullet ignored most cover. This was a weapon for the millions who didn't need the subtleties of ballistics explained to them. The simplicity of the design allowed it to be stamped out in such quantities that the rifle became the background noise of the war. Reliable, crude, and lethal. However, while some trusted in old bolts, others tried to look into the future and create a self-loading ideal. One that eventually became the most coveted trophy for German soldiers who despised their own rifles. The most paradoxical fact of the war, German soldiers would abandon their own carbines for the Soviet SVT self-loader, while within the Red Army itself, it was considered too fickle. It was a weapon of the future that fell into the wrong hands at the wrong time. The SVT-40, Tokarev self-loading rifle, was an attempt to give every soldier the power of 10 rifles in one. 10 consecutive shots without reloading. For 1941, this was an extraordinary level of firepower. However, the Soviet system made a strategic miscalculation. It gave a complex mechanism requiring expert maintenance to former peasants who were used to cleaning their weapons only on holidays. Consequently, the rifle adored by elite units and the Marines for its rate of fire became a useless piece of iron in the hands of an average conscript. Conversely, in the hands of the enemy, the SVT became an elite tool. The Germans officially adopted captured rifles into their own service, admitting that their own industry was incapable of creating anything comparable. But if the SVT was a tool for the chosen few, our final hero became the symbol of a last chance and officer authority. A pistol that hated its owner almost as much as it hated the enemy. This pistol wasn't designed to save lives, it was created to punch through German helmets and the army body armor of the era. Crude, aggressive, and devoid of even a hint of safety, the TT became the most honest symbol of the Soviet war machine. The Tokarev pistol is the quintessence of the stopping power philosophy at the expense of everything else. The designers simply took a powerful cartridge and forced it to work in a pocket-sized weapon. The result? The TT pierced through things that the vaunted Walters and Lugers failed against. It had no safety in the traditional sense. The system did not forgive mistakes and could fire into the owner's leg at any careless movement. The engineers simply didn't give a damn about ergonomics or grip comfort. The TT had to be flat, cheap to produce, and capable of stopping an enemy with a single hit. It wasn't a fashion accessory, it was an instrument of the last argument, as cold and ruthless as the orders of that time. 5 types of weapons, 5 different paths to a single goal. In this race for survival, it wasn't the aesthetics of the blueprints that won, but the dry mathematics of the assembly line, which turned steel into the cheapest and most effective commodity on the market of death. The German MG-34 was nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for its blistering rate of fire, but it demanded maintenance like a temperamental violin. The Soviet DP-27 was its polar opposite. Crude, heavy, and assembled from just a handful of parts, it kept firing even when enemy machinery choked on the mud. The Degtyaryov machine gun became the embodiment of the soldier weapon concept. There was nothing superfluous about it, save for the massive 47-round Pan magazine that earned it the nickname the record player. The designers opted for deliberate simplification. They positioned the recoil spring in a way that caused it to overheat and lose tension, and the magazine was notoriously difficult to load. But in the context of total war, these flaws were irrelevant. What mattered most was that a former schoolboy could assemble and fix a DP-27 in a frozen trench. It was a machine gun that was neither coddled nor spared. It was used as an expendable asset to create a wall of suppressive fire where elegant German mechanisms simply turned into heaps of useless iron. While a machine gun offered a chance of survival to an entire platoon, our next subject was designed for those whose lives were valued at exactly 1 shot against the enemy's steel armor. When German tanks were charging toward Moscow, the Soviet soldier had no time for complex anti-tank guns. He was given the PTRD, essentially a common water pipe fitted with a bolt, spitting out a bullet capable of punching straight through armor. The Degtyaryov anti-tank rifle is the apotheosis of design desperation and calculated brutality. It was developed and rushed into production in just 22 days. There isn't a drop of concern for the operator in this design. The massive recoil-shattered shoulders and the cloud of dust kicked up by the shot instantly gave away the position, turning the shooter into a target. The PTRD was a single-shot, primitive tool. After firing, the casing was ejected automatically, and the soldier had to manually shove the next round in while under fire from advancing tanks. It was a last-stand weapon, created with a single purpose: to give an infantryman a cheap chance to burn an enemy machine before being crushed by its tracks. But if the Degtyaryov rifle was a symbol of desperate defense, our next subject bore witness to the darkest pages of history, remaining in service long after every other revolver in the world had become a museum piece. By the start of the Second World War, this revolver was considered an antique that took longer to reload than the actual fight lasted. But it possessed one unique and chilling trait that made it an indispensable tool for the war's dirtiest tasks. The Nagant M1895 is a symbol of technical stagnation, elevated to a cult status. Its design was hopelessly slow. To reload 7 rounds, a soldier had to manually knock out each spent casing one by one with an ejector rod. However, engineers kept it in production because of its phenomenal reliability and a specific trick. Upon firing, the cylinder moved forward to seal against the barrel, completely eliminating gas leakage. This made the Nagant the only mass-produced revolver that could effectively be fitted with a Bramit silencer. Consequently, a weapon unfit for open combat became the ideal instrument for liquidators, scouts, and NKVD special squads working in the silence of basements and forests. 5, 7, 8 steel tools. Each was a part of a giant machine operating by the laws of cold arithmetic. Now it is time to draw a line under this triumph of ruthless logic. The Second World War proved one terrifying truth. Victory goes not to the one with the most elegant blueprints, but to the one who can fastest turn their country into a giant resource processing plant. Soviet iron won, not in spite of its simplicity, but because of it. We are used to thinking that progress always means complexity, but the history of the Eastern Front crossed out that logic. While German industry choked trying to provide spare parts for its jeweled mechanisms, Soviet factories pumped out millions of crude, clanking, and uncomfortable guns. This was a deliberate choice in favor of the tyranny of mass. Designers consciously stripped everything human from the weapons, leaving only bare efficiency. In this system, the soldier was merely a carrier for the submachine gun, and the gun was a consumable with a lifespan of just a few battles. It was a cold mathematical calculation where the enemy's individual skill was simply nullified by a steel torrent that never ended. Ultimately, victory was claimed not by geniuses or heroes, but by the assembly line that stamped out death faster than the enemy could comprehend it. This lesson in industrial cynicism remains forever inscribed in history as the most effective and most merciless logic of war.